The Connector Next Door is your invitation to meet the natural connectors all around us. They represent the everyday event planners who are energizing their communities every single day. Their stories are familiar, fun, and full of charm. Your host, Lisa Garrow, is a lifelong event planner and has been a connection strategy coach for over a decade. She knows events can become energized connecting points where communities can gather and grow. Let's listen in as she strikes up a conversation with today's Connector Next Door.
I feel I got to know author B. Jeffrey Madoff when reading his book, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. On the faculty at Parsons School for Design, Jeffrey taught a course he developed called Creativity, Making a Living with Your Ideas. I'm grateful he put many of the concepts and conversations from his course into his book, so creatives like me can still learn from his journey as a creative. Jeffrey began his career as a fashion designer. He was chosen one of the top 10 designers in the U.S., then switched careers to film and video production as the founder and CEO of Madoff Productions. Jeffrey edited and directed award-winning commercials, documentaries, and web content around the world for clients such as Ralph Lauren, Victoria's Secret, Tiffany, Radio City, the American Academy of Dramatic Arts, Harvard University, and Weill Cornell Medical College. Jeffrey's been busy, but he's not slowing down, as he's now the playwright and lead producer of Personality, the Lloyd Price musical. It's interesting in our conversation how, instead of using the word connection, Jeffrey uses the word relationship, saying, when you build a relationship, you're building trust. We both agreed it's trust that opens the door to new conversations, projects, ideas, and spaces where we can be ourselves. Hi everyone, and welcome back to the Connector Next Door and to your opportunity to meet another natural connector in my world, somebody who is a master relationship builder, and he is someone that has been making a living with his ideas for his whole life. Jeff, I am so excited that you're here. Thank you so much for taking the time to have this conversation about connection and creativity with me today.
Well, it's my pleasure, Lisa, and I hope you feel that good about it at the end.
As I mentioned when we first met, your book was on the top of a pile of books right beside my burger and fries at the end of a long day in the middle of course creation for me, and I just could not put your book down. It was such an encouragement to read your life as a creative and how you have learned to make a living doing this work. What I'd love to layer on today is the conversation about connection. And with every guest that comes on the podcast, I ask what connection means to them. I'd love to hear your answer to that, Jeff. What does connection mean to you?
To me, someone who is a connection is somebody who will take my calls and be responsive. You know, whether it's an affirmative or a negative, that they're responsive. And, you know, obviously, if it's all negative, that gives you a message. But a connection is just someone who you connect with. Now, you shouldn't use the word as part of the definition of the word, but some people also call connecting networking, which I don't really care for that word. To me, the real word is not connection, is not networking. It's building relationships. And building relationships is what's crucial in business and in life. And that's meaningful. I think that if one's agenda is in establishing connections or getting into a network, then their agenda really isn't about what's in it for the other person. It's about what's in it for themselves. And I think that limits growth because when you're in a position that people are approaching you all the time, you can kind of smell it. You sort of get it by the third or fourth sentence, you know. And so to me, I choose to look at it, and the way that I have built the relationships I have is thinking about the other person and say, well, how is there a mutual benefit? Maybe at some points there isn't a mutual benefit. They're benefiting, and I just benefit by the residual of the relationship that is being built. So I think relationships are the most important, not really connecting. We tend to jargonize. which is jargon in itself. But and that jargon takes over, and so relationships, friendships become connections.
Mm,
That's my network. To me, there's something that makes it more. I'm not even sure what the word is, but it
mm,
makes it less intimate, less humane in a certain way, because uh, again, there's this kind of, if you're going to meet with your lawyer or accountant, you have an intention about a specific thing you want to talk about, or your doctor or something like that. When you're in business, oftentimes, if you are open, you're also discovering something, maybe where you can help somebody without any thinking about what you're going to get from that.
mm.
Other than the fact, if you step back and think, oh, this is how you build relationships, because I do for them, they do for me. There's reciprocity, there's helping each other out. But I think if you enter into each interaction with a person, where there are areas where you want to be intentional because you're paying for their time, you want to be focused in terms of what you're talking about.
Hmm.
And you also, I believe, want to be honest about what it is. You know, like when
Hmm.
somebody says to me, I have this idea that I think will bring you a lot of value. My
Okay.
first response is, what's this going to cost? What are you trying to sell me?
Mm,
You
right.
know, whoever says, Lisa, I want to really waste your time for the next half hour, tell you a bunch of crap that you aren't really interested in and doesn't mean anything to you, but maybe I can get something out of
The complications, right, of relationships. How have you navigated through your connections in a way that you feel like you're still happy to connect or happy to build those relationships? What's important to you in those?
it. What's important to me is if the person I'm talking to has a sense of humor, curiosity, uh, is smart, or what I consider to be
Hmm.
smart, and a sense of empathy and compassion, so that you feel like you're actually talking to somebody, not talking to an agenda plan.
Right.
Since we've moved online, everything is so targeting all the time,
Hmm. Hmm.
and, to me, target is something you shoot at.
Hmm.
you know,
Yeah, exactly.
did you hit
Yeah.
the target? And it's kind of, in a way, it's kind of now I'm thinking about it, a term of conflict,
Hmm.
not a term of embrace. And to me, relationships embrace some in a very wide way, your closest friendships and family and so on that you have. You don't think of, yes, well, I'm targeting my son and daughter today.
And if you are, maybe there's some other conversations that need to happen before. One thing that you said, now we'll get into a little bit about your work, but one thing you said about a current project that you have, the casting call. How could relationship building, how does it relate to the theater and to your work in actually bringing together people that probably have different experiences, a lot of different perspectives on the project, and they're now having to work together pretty intensely? What is relationship building in that context?
I mean, that's a very big and interesting question, uh, because you do have a plan, and that plan is the script.
Hmm. Right.
Okay, so to the talent that's involved, they have to feel, and I have to feel, that they are somehow engaged with it and get it.
Mm.
And sometimes people are just looking for a paying gig, and that's totally understandable. And sometimes there are people who want more from what it is they do. You know, I happen to be somebody that money is not primary. Uh, I've always been able to work that out because fortunately my businesses have done well. But I believe the best business plan is doing really good work, and
Mm.
quality is the best business plan.
Mm.
So I think about that. How can I deliver on that promise? When I am hiring people or casting people, it's, do they have the kind of talents that this part calls for? In my play, Personality, the Lloyd Price musical, when we last spoke, I was going to be heading to London for casting, which I've since done. And then I'm going back to London. We're now going to be in rehearsals for 3 weeks and doing some couple showcases there. So you think about, is this person right for the part? And it's not just their singular talent and what they have. And in our case, they need to be triple threat talents, which is singer, dancer, actor. But how do they fit in with the cast? How do they manifest physically with how this character is imagined to be? It was funny. Some years ago, there was a reading of a screenplay that I had written, and 15 minutes before the curtain was going up and the theater was full, one of the supporting actors came up to me and said, you know, I've been meaning to talk to you. I have a problem. This character, I just don't think this character wouldn't say that at that point. That's, they just wouldn't say that. So I need to have that motivation and understand why I'm saying that, because I don't think that character would. And I said, okay, two things. Number one, I created that character, and that's what he said. That's all the credit. That's all the credibility you need for that. And then come over here. And it's a few steps over, and I pull back the curtain a little bit. There's 250 people out there, and we're starting in under 15 minutes. That's your motivation. Okay, got it. Fine. He just wanted some attention on that.
Yeah.
But, the casting, not hiring, I think is something that can apply to not just theater, but applies to businesses in terms of how you evaluate that person and how you determine whether or not they become part of the cast, so to speak, as opposed to an employee. How do they become part of the cast? Because when you are doing theater, everyone's performance depends on everyone else's. If you're partnering in a dance number, both people need to know that. If you're engaged in a dialogue, and I think it's funny, and to you it's serious conflict, you got to be you're coming from the same script. So you have to understand the character motivations. What do they want? What are they willing to give up for it? What are the obstacles in the way of that? How do they behave? How do they react? All those things. And when you are building a team, whether you have a business where a lot of these same kinds of questions come in, do we share certain values? Do we communicate well? Do you communicate well with others? There's all kinds of things. And I think that most disciplines, whether it's theater or building up some kind of corporate entity, and by the way, starting a play is an entrepreneurial venture. It's a startup. You're starting with an idea, and you have to actualize that, and it takes money in order to do that. So, you have to have certain understandings that help fuel it and move it forward. But the notion of casting, I think, is really interesting, not just for theater and film, but for businesses at large. Because I think that's how you build the best teams, where people feel valued and they become a part of that cast or that ensemble.
People that are listening to this are planning and promoting their own events. And one big part of putting events together is building teams. It's all about relationships. Are you finding when it's brand new, like what would be those steps that you're taking to make sure everybody's feeling like they are building relationships with each other as well?
Well, the first thing we do is a table read, which is what it sounds like. We all sit around the table, the whole cast, and it's the first time everybody hears everybody else's voices. And it's a way of familiarizing yourself with the material and the other people who are in the cast. One of the things that we did in each iteration of the play is we would have, after our first table read and the first rehearsal, which was that, we would go to a local bar or whatever, so that we could be together outside of the theater, outside of the rehearsal space, and get to know each other a bit.
Yeah.
And so, it's just breaking down those walls, because when you're doing a story, it can be very emotional. There's
Mm.
a lot of emotion in this play. And, you know, when you are the product, meaning you're the actor
Yeah.
on stage, or you're the person in the movie or whatever, you're vulnerable. And so it's about
Mm.
I think a director's primary job, and I have a fantastic director, Sheldon Epps, is that people feel safe.
Mm.
So when you feel safe, then you aren't reluctant to or afraid to contribute and
Right.
to have ideas. And I never hire anybody whose ideas I'm not interested in. Why would I hire them? But
Right.
I see that, you know, I've worked with many very large global companies, and the pecking order is really apparent in the room during big meetings. And I'm thinking, that's when I say I'm unemployable. We were talking before. Uh, because I think that it's so important that you acknowledge another person's value, because when you do, they will contribute because they feel then emotionally invested in the project too.
Hmm.
And I think that that's really critical for doing good work. And I think that there's a lot of management out there that's fear based.
Hmm.
And those kinds of leaders, who I don't consider to be good leaders, lead by fear, and they mistake people for not bringing something up as agreement,
Mm.
as opposed to realizing, no, you've set up a culture here where people are reluctant to talk because they know they get their head taken off by you
Hmm.
if it's something you don't agree with. There's so much interesting spillover in the arts and in theater and regular business.
Yeah.
But I do believe there's two things it comes down to. Number one is we've been talking about relationships, you know, and relationships are also is, you know, can you refer this person to another person you know? Or would you be reluctant to do so because you think they're a little, you know, I don't want to risk my relationship by introducing that person to the person that they knew I knew. I don't think there's going to be a fit there, and I'm not comfortable. And I say it to people. I know many people, and people say, you know, I would really appreciate an introduction to X. I say, what for? What do you want to connect for? Well, I mean, we're kind of in a similar space, and I think, you know, yeah, you know, what are you bringing to the table? And I said, look, I'm really reluctant to do that. Now, there are times, and I don't have to be prompted, that this happened as recently as yesterday. I was talking to a good friend of mine. I had asked him, well, do you know this person? And he said, no, I know a little bit about their company. I said, I think you would be a really good fit. And I told him about them. He said, they sound perfect. He said, I think so. I can introduce you to one of the founders if you would like that introduction. I felt totally comfortable because I saw what the melding was. To
Hmm.
just sort of
Hmm.
collect people, I don't think is worthwhile for either party in that. You know, it's really being aware of, oh, there's a fit that is mutually beneficial to them.
You've told me that when you were younger, you were somebody that didn't necessarily fit in sort of the school system. You were doodling on your paper, you did well in school. Was there a time where you realized the value of a connection or somebody that gave you an opportunity to be yourself and brought you into a bigger expression of your creativity?
Uh, my parents basically let me do anything I wanted. And so they had a retail store. So they had like craft paper. I used to draw all the
Mm.
time. They'd bring me these big sheets, and I could do whatever I want and put them up on the wall in my room. And my room was my space, and I could express however I wanted to. And so I was encouraged from a very young age. And my sister, who was 4 years older than I, my parents bought her a blackboard. She loved playing teacher. So
Mm.
I could actually read and write and do things by the time I entered kindergarten,
Wow.
because my sister loved the teaching and loved doing it. She still likes trying to boss me around. And So was always that was the kind of situation that I was in school. Where I had conflicts wasn't with other kids at all. There were I was the kind of student that teachers either really liked or really didn't like because I asked questions. There's a lot of people in life that don't like that, when you ask questions. But I had a really good time in school. I did have some run-ins with faculty and did get suspended at one point. And these things were like laughable offenses, stupid. But I think that, what encouraged me was my parents, it wasn't even granting permission. It was a permissive environment where as long as you weren't doing anything that hurt anybody or was physically destructive, you could do what you want. And like my mom got me, when I was a little kid, I loved Oscar Levant and Lenny Bruce. Okay. I don't know if you're familiar with them, but there, Oscar Levant was the premier interpreter of Gershwin, and he was an author, and he also acted in some movies, and he used to be on the Jack Parr program, and my parents would let me stay up and watch it. And he was so entertaining to me. And when I was in, I guess probably fifth or sixth grade, his autobiography came out called Memoirs of an Amnesiac. My mom had gotten me an adult library card. I went to the library to take out that book. The librarian said, well, I can't let you take that book out. I said, why? I have my mom's card. It's an adult card. Does your mother know? I need to talk to your mother first. And so she called my mom and said, Mrs. Madoff, you know your son, Jeffrey? And she said, yes, he's my son, Jeffrey. Of course I know him. You can see where I get some of this. They said, well, he wants to take a book out, and you got him an adult library card, he said. She said, that's right. And what's your question? Well, I want to tell you about this book that he wants to take out. And she said, I don't care what book it is. He can take out whatever he wants. I'm not afraid of him reading. I think that's a great way to spend time. Wow. So you don't need to call me again. Make it a note that if any book he wants to take out of the library, he can take out of the library. When I look back on that, I didn't realize quite how profound that was when I was a kid. But it's my parents were always open to ideas. Fostered that in me and my sister, is doing things and being open to those things and different influences and all of that. So there was no one thing, but creativity can come from a very dark place, being rejected, not having friends, trying to win people over, whatever. Or it can come from a more positive place. And there's no correct answers because it has to do with somebody's upbringing and the people they knew and how they were influenced and all of that sort of a thing. But I think that I was very fortunate because my compelling need for expression was indulged by my parents, or at the very least encouraged, and certainly not discouraged.
And it opened the door, it seems, to embracing whatever was ready to come. You had built a company, I think, in your mid-20s. Where did you seem to find your feet then as a creative, where you knew this could be a thing, like where you could actually make a living doing what you love and being creative?
Well, it's funny because they were loving, but it was also, I mean, they both worked. My mom and dad owned their own business. They were entrepreneurs. They worked. I grew up seeing a very smart, aggressive businesswoman paired with a very smart, aggressive businessman. And they talked business, at the dinner table.
That was my upbringing too.
Yeah. Yep. So it's just that the environment was such, it wasn't like conscious deciding. And on a certain level, I could be in my room for hours drawing or writing or something. And, they were at work. But so I don't know that it was as particularly nurturing as more it was permissive in a good way. Because because there were also boundaries that I didn't go beyond, or I wasn't supposed to go beyond.
Mm-hmm.
But I learned at a very young age, and again, this is looking back, we all look back and sort of organize our life so it makes sense, but our memory is very tricky in that realm. We all try to make sense of our lives and why they unfold this way. My version of it is how my parents were so open, and as a result, and they also had lifelong friends. And that's one of the big things that I saw with them, because the behavior was modeled, it wasn't lectured. They had the people that worked for my parents, when they'd be asking, how do you get a job with Madoffs? They had these small women's retail stores. And they said, well, somebody's got to die because nobody ever quits. Because they treated people well.
Yeah,
They respected them and treated them well. We saw, my sister and I, she has her own successful retail business, we saw how they interacted with people. It wasn't like an academic study of who these people were. I just saw their ease and always lots of laughter. And I saw that ease and laughter and camaraderie among the people. They had very low turnover. And it's just about treating people well and with respect and having that sense of humor and curiosity, So I was never afraid of ideas. They were something to explore and not to shun. And I was always open to meeting new people.
The bridge from giving yourself, I guess, as a young adult, kind of moving into a space where now you're making some choices for yourself. And what a great example of that ease in relationships that it sounds like you've taken with you in your life. Where did you start to now kind of put your stake in the ground and say, this is something I really want to take hold of and start building something unique?
It's interesting because there are people who have a master plan, and that from conception, they knew that they wanted to do X. And I wasn't one of those. I had a lot of jobs when I was a kid. Every time there's a snow day, that was an opportunity to make some money and go shovel snow in Akron, Ohio. And by the way, I had a double major in philosophy and psychology. I did not study art. And, and we were talking before we started recording, culturally, how creativity, I don't think, is terribly valued in the United States unless you become really successful. But on the way there, you're not taken seriously. So, if you're going to be a doctor or a lawyer or a dentist or an accountant, nobody says, well, what's your fallback position? But if you want to be a writer, an actor, a dancer, a musician, a painter, whatever, well, what's your fallback position? And my fallback position was always my own resourcefulness, because I want to do what I want to do. So how do I get to do it?
Yeah.
But when I started my first adult business, it sounds like I was in porn. I wasn't.
Too many library books.
Yeah, but there were no pictures. All these words. But I was working in this boutique. I had finished school, and I was working in this boutique where I was the buyer for it. And I got a phone call one day from a dear friend of mine. His mom and my mom grew up together. And I don't remember a time he and I didn't know each other. And he was graduated a year before me from college. And he said, look, I've saved up some money. Can you think of a gig that would earn more than bank interest? And I said, well, I see what we sell in the store. I could always draw. I'll start a clothing company. And he said, okay. And
you got out the craft paper.
That's right. And actually, what I did was took a shirt that I really liked and cut it along the seam lines to see what are the pieces and how did these things go together. Not that I was going to learn how to sew, but I wanted to see what are the component parts of this. The women who did alterations, for the store, which is mainly just shortening sleeves and pant legs and so on, wasn't like suits and complicated stuff, but they could sew. And so I would initially bought fabrics, and I was incredibly naive. When I went to a fabric store and I saw stuff on the bolt, I
Uh-huh.
thought that is wholesale because it hasn't been made into anything yet. So I learned a lot. The things as I established very early, and I think this is a critical lesson in any business you do, including theater, including event planning, is if people aren't willing to write a check, if they aren't willing to buy it, you really have to ask yourself, do you have a viable business there? Because you need proof of concept. You're not going to commit to an event space, commit to catering, commit to all the employees you need and everything else, and just hope it works. You've got to know that you've got a market for this event, that you're going to be able to sell tickets and have all that kind of a mechanism laid out. And that's, not unlike making a film or putting together a play. There's lots of different talents that you need, plus all the supporting talents from the caterers and the food and, transportation, court taken care of, and travel and accommodations. All that stuff happens in theater, happens in event planning, happens in many businesses. It was learning those things. And when I started the clothing company and I saw that my designs sold, so we sold everything out, there's only like 18 pieces, but sold it out literally in a weekend, which was a lot. And then
Wow.
we did it again, had them made again, and sold them out again really quickly. And then I had more done and put them on a suitcase, strapped it on the back of my motorcycle, drove from Madison, Wisconsin to Chicago, and went to 19 shops. And I think I sold 14 or 15 of them.
Huh.
And I was kind of off and running. The problem was I hadn't really paused to think, well, how in the hell am I going to actually make this stuff? Because then I've got to make it, and I've got to get it manufactured, deliver it, and get paid for
Right.
it. So it was kind of crazy because it was really learning while I was doing.
The proof of concept, that's part of that creativity, right? Where you're jumping in, you're testing smaller batches, you're giving
That's
it a
right.
chance, and just taking that step at a time, it sounds like, with somebody that had your back and somebody that was a friend. I think there's something to be said about the relationships within that as well. Giving yourself permission to try. Like as a creative, did you feel like somehow you had arrived to another step or another stage in your creativity?
It's funny because I'm asked the same thing about theater.
Mm,
And your kind of comparison is very accurate in terms of the different skill sets that you need and the different people involved and when building the team so it can all actualize. I didn't feel pressure until, and this was a big lesson, there was a recession in the early 70s. I was 21 when I started the company, and within a year or so I had 110 employees,
wow.
and major stores weren't paying in net 30 days. They were taking 90 and 120 days.
Mm,
And I had to lay people off for the first time as opposed to growing and growing quickly. And these were all people that were older than me, that had families, that had kids, whatever. And I was profoundly aware of the impact I was having on their lives, the negative impact, because it was a necessary income for that family. And that was tough. That was really tough. It's a lesson that I learned young, which I think was helpful and was, good.
hmm.
But it also taught me a lot. I have a really bad reaction when there's certain executives that can lay off literally sometimes thousands of people, but they make an excessive wage.
Mm,
And they seem to have no empathy or compassion. Empathy is the feeling, compassion is acting on that, to try to make something better. It's funny. I talked to somebody who worked for me. He was my right hand person for the first couple of years in business. And then he ended up moving away, and that's not what he wanted to do. He was, my age. And I had not spoken to him for 47 years. I left Wisconsin. He stayed there for a while. Then he left and moved to Seattle. And I had been thinking about him because I had this briefcase he made for me. And
mm.
he became a pattern maker because he knew how to put stuff together. I called him, I Googled him and I found him. And I called him out of the blue. had been 47, 50 years since we spoke. And we talked for like 3 hours. Wonderful. It was really, really wonderful. And I mention that because I think when you have real relationships,
Yeah.
time can pass, but there's no gap to bridge.
Yeah.
And that's a wonderful feeling. When you build a relationship, you're building trust, which means you can refer people, which means you're willing to meet someone that somebody else suggests. And trust is huge in business because everybody's got lots of choices as to who to spend their money with, and who to spend their time with. So I think trust is a huge thing that goes along with it, because that's a really important component to a relationship. And that's how relationships grow.
And trust opens the door to so many other conversations and
That's right.
projects and ideas and a space where we can be ourselves. I'd love to just have you share a little bit about your book before we say goodbye, if you still have a couple of minutes, where people can find the book and what you would love people to know about using their creativity in a way that builds amazing events.
Well, I think it's really important to ask yourself, why do I want to do this? What do I hope to get out of it? And do I like this enough that I'm going to be able to withstand the inevitable obstacles that are going to pop up along the way and not be so discouraged? Because, life is littered with the bodies of people who thought they had a great idea, but didn't know it would be so hard. Well, it is hard. It's hard to build a business. It's hard to sustain a business. And so you better really love what it is that you're doing, and be very clear as to your purpose, why you're doing it, and what you hope to get out of it. I had no idea that my life was going to take such a pivot when I met Lloyd Price and was hired to do the documentary about him, which led to me doing the play about his life. That I could have never predicted that any of that was going to happen. And it's been phenomenal. But as we spoke earlier, it takes perseverance, and it's not easy. That's one of the things that and there's so many of these, entrepreneurs out there who are selling how to grow your business overnight and all that. And it's all horseshit. That just doesn't happen. There is the occasional rare lightning in a bottle, but that's usually not sustained. And so realizing that it's a tough go and being realistic about the challenges. And the other part is, a lot of people talk about, and you mentioned, giving yourself permission or getting permission. And I love Nike's slogan, just do it. And they've left it a number of times and always come back to it because they will never improve on it. It's one of the best slogans out there, because you don't know until you try. So the sure way to make sure that nothing happens is to do nothing. And if you do, there's a good chance nothing's going to happen. So you put yourself out there, you give yourself permission, because asking permission to do something presupposes someone's controlling you. And if you want to start your own business, if you want to be entrepreneurial, if you want to do something that gives your life more meaning that you have more control over what your destiny is, realize that it is hard. It does take perseverance, but that you're the one that has to give you personality. That's the name of my play. You're the one that has to give yourself permission. So that means you don't ask it, you just do it. And just do it is a very powerful maxim, because it really relates to everything. I think that comes through in my book, Creative Careers, Making a Living with Your Ideas. How's that for a segue, huh? Because in the book, it's embedded in my story is the stories of many of these people who I had as guests in my class at Parsons School for Design of the same name, Creative Careers. And the unifying thread through all of these is, first of all, you don't know what's going to happen. So when you invest your time and your money, as a dear friend of mine says, it's all guesses and bets. You don't know. But I've always opted for what's more interesting and engaging because there are no such things as sure things.
Mm.
And anything that is promising easy money quick isn't real, doesn't happen. So I think if people realize that not only is it going to be a struggle at times and a very difficult one, and you'll have doubt and all these things as you're going through it, if you realize, something, that's what everybody goes through. And it's not that misery loves company. It's just not that you're not in a uniquely pained position. This is what it takes to build a business. This is what it takes to build meaningful connections and relationships. It's a commitment of time, a commitment of energy, and there's no guarantee that the outcome is going to be positive.
If it's driven by a purpose and meaning, something that you can wake up every morning and just say, yep, there's something more behind this than just checking off that to-do list. If we get really clear on why we're doing this, it does become maybe a more joyful journey to continue.
I think more the word that I use is it's more gratifying.
Yeah.
That there is, wow, I've done something. There are moments
Yeah.
of joy and there's moments of, oh shit, and just all of that. But I think overall, it's the gratification of doing something and realizing an idea and a vision that has brought these people together.
Yeah.
And in terms of theater, it's bringing joy, connection, and this very profound feeling that will never be replaced by AI of live actors telling a real story that is organic because it's different every single night. It's
Yeah,
never
love
exactly
that.
the same. That's the nature of theater or a sporting event, anything live. And I think that inherent risk in doing it live, which means like, unlike a movie, you can't do that scene over again, charges the atmosphere. And when you're doing something that's really good, it's very gratifying to have been instrumental in bringing that to life. And then new relationships, of which I've made many as a result of this, and how satisfying that is too.
And it sounds like you're not stopping anytime soon. And if I could quote the poster from Nike from the 90s that I had in my first apartment, there is no finish line. Set our sights on bigger things, bringing people together in different ways. There's always something more. And it's the hard work, but it's also seeing those results over time. And I so appreciate the time with you today to have this conversation, for just allowing us to listen to more of your story. And I will encourage everyone that hasn't read the book yet, that it's probably in your library somewhere, which is where I got it the first time, also on Audible and other places that you can find it. If someone wants to continue this conversation and have just a peek into your world and what it would mean to make a living as a creative, kind of putting yourself out there, taking those risks, how can they find the book, more about your work, the play that's coming up?
So there's a few things. I'm going to interject one comment because what you said before that wrap up was really good about the different aspects of the job, so to speak, and of doing those things. The way that I put it is you have to love the process because it is never really over. And so loving the process is critical because in that way, you don't think of, oh, when is this going to end? You realize that this is a process. It's organic. It's kind of a life thing. And it may not be that specific product or project, but it's the process, which is the narrative of your life. And that's really important. You can find my book at Amazon and all fine booksellers. And it's, you can, if you follow me on LinkedIn, B. Jeffrey Madoff, I post quotes from the people that I interview from my class and the different things that I've done that you might find interesting. And on Instagram at A Creative Career, so A Creative Career Instagram. Madoff Productions is the website where you can see the film and video work that I did. And every day I walk around New York and I take pictures in black and white, and I post them on, it's either Jeffrey or B. Jeffrey Madoff, with no spaces, on Instagram. And it's about city life. And it's just pure expression. And the only reason I put it on Instagram is I function really well on deadlines. So if I say to myself, I want to post something every day by X o'clock, otherwise I think, it doesn't make any difference. And then I don't. So I do that. And that's a fun window into New York City and just how I look at life in New York. It's fun.
So
I
great.
enjoy doing it.
I love it. Thank you again for your time. And thanks for putting who you are out there. It's a real inspiration to me personally, and I'm sure to those that were listening today. I hope you all take the time to follow, get the book, be inspired, and know that you are creative, whatever that looks like, however that is manifesting itself in your world. And let's start to plan events in ways that will bring people together in really rich and fun relationships. Let's have some fun out there too. Thanks again, Jeff.
Thank you.
The Connector Next Door podcast is produced by Candy Event Consulting, where everyday event planners and their teams gain clarity, get connected, and grow in confidence. Subscribe at www.candyconsulting.ca to hear visits with everyday event planners who are putting connections first.